Hey friends, the Azure Developer CLI enables you to accelerate your journey from local development environment to Azure. You can initialize a repo, provision resources, deploy your application with a single command line. Savannah Ostrowski is here to show me how it works today on Azure Friday. Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman and it's Azure Friday. I'm going to learn all about the Azure Developer CLI from Savannah Ostrowski. How are you?
Good. How are you, Scott?
I'm confused because I use AZ. I use the Azure CLI, but this is not that, right?
No, new CLI for developers, application developers.
Okay, so hang on. Now, why do we need two? What's the difference? I usually like make resources with AZ. I put stuff in Azure storage. It's kind of like my Azure it's the front end on the Azure Resource Management API. What is AZD?
AZD is, for application developers, we want to map every stage in the development workflow to a command. So we're kind of abstracting away some of that nitty-gritty Azure stuff.
That is interesting because I like my Azure CLI, but sometimes I'm going dash dash resource this and dash dash that, and I have to think about a lot of like the little details.
Yeah, it's a lot of cognitive load there.
That's an interesting way to put it. There is cognitive load, right? There's administrivia. Because what I'm thinking is I've got a container or I've got a web app and I want it to go up there. Can we do that?
Yes, so you can use AZD provision and AZD deploy to get all of your code up in the cloud in a matter of seconds.
Okay, let's get into some demos because this is something I got to see to believe.
Cool. All right. So I guess last month we announced our public preview of the Azure Developer CLI, which, as Scott mentioned, aims to kind of accelerate the time that it takes for you to get from your local development environment to the cloud, to the Azure cloud. But kind of before jumping into the CLI, let's kind of talk about the things that we saw application developers struggling with. And so, as a developer, there are a lot of choices that you need to make when it comes time to kind of build, deploy, and secure your application for the cloud. In my own experience, I found myself asking a lot of these questions, right? Like, how do I know that what I'm doing is secure? How do I know that I'm provisioning the right infrastructure for my application? And all these questions take a lot of time to get answers to. They're kind of overwhelming and ultimately kind of impact your productivity and velocity when you just want to focus on writing app code. And I think a lot of developers, are kind of unfamiliar with these kind of DevOps pieces of engineering systems, because at bigger companies or where companies have the resources, there's usually a token build and deploy person that's handling those scenarios. But I don't really think that it needs to be that way, right? Especially if you're writing your own app or you work at a smaller company, you don't have the luxury of having that token person who's an expert in the build and deploy systems for your application. And so that's kind of the framework for why we created the Azure Developer CLI. And so we wanted to create this tool that kind of accelerated the journey from your environment to Azure, but also answers kind of those big questions and turns them into a series of steps that are simple and repeatable from the environment that you're most comfortable in. And under the hood, our CLI is using these extensible application templates that include kind of everything you need in an application to get up and running on Azure. That's, best practices, application code, reusable infrastructure as code assets. But more than that, they kind of cover the end-to-end scenarios that go a lot beyond hello world. We're talking about kind of the inner loop development, project initialization, provisioning resources, deploying your code to Azure, monitoring your application, CI/CD. So we can take a look at what this looks like in practice, and I'll head over to GitHub to talk about kind of a bit about the templates we've created.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions. I'm trying to absorb this because here I see AZD up, and then you go dash dash template, which implies that there's, as you show here, a whole library of templates. And I'm trying to figure out the difference between the Jumpstarter templates and then maybe I've already got an application running locally. Am I picking a template? And does that bring sample code down, or does that just mean that my application I have locally matches a certain style or a certain template?
Yeah, so you can kind of you can do both of those things, right? So you can start off with one of these templates that we've authored or someone in the community's authored that kind of cover some of the scenario that you're looking to kind of address, right? So if you're writing a Python app or a C# app or a Node.js app, we have support for all of those, as well as supporting a variety of Azure hosts if you're familiar with them. Maybe you're not. but we have Azure App Service, Azure Static Web Apps, Functions, Container Apps, and you can kind of take a look at a bunch of these and figure out which one makes the most sense for your application, or you can even create your own template from your existing code base. And we have guidance and docs on that as well to kind of help guide you through that process so that you can make your app AZD compatible and then kind of share that back out with the community.
Yeah, because like I have a C# application that's on an Azure web app, but it has a back end that's a third-party REST API.
Yeah.
So I would be really interested in figuring out how to make it so I can just go AZD up on that.
Yeah.
It sounds like after this, I'll be able to learn how to do that.
I mean, I hope so, right? So let's take a look at this sample. I used to work on Python things, so I have a tendency to choose Python applications. But yeah, this is kind of an example of one of our sample apps. This kind of gives you a brief overview of what you're looking at. If you're interested in what the application does, it's a simple to-do application. But as I kind of mentioned, like the idea here is that we're providing a really good foundation for you. And then you can kind of swap out components, add your own app code and really make this your own. So these are completely extensible to your solution, your application. But at a glance, what this is really doing is setting up, a React.js front end, a Python with Fast API backend. And Fast API is great if you're working in Python because it has type annotations, which is helpful for finding errors and warnings or bugs in your code. And so that's kind of coming back to those best practices. And then we are using Cosmos for storage and Azure Monitor for monitoring and logging. That sounds pretty great.
If I can ask one question. So I'm looking at the directories on the left there. Yeah. And I see ASDO, which means that it has a configured pipeline for Azure DevOps. I see GitHub Workflows, which means that it's configured for GitHub Actions. I see VS Code, which means that it knows about extensions and it knows about Visual Studio Code. So as a developer, it might make recommendations to me. And then I see a .dev container, which means that as I open it in VS Code is going to say, hey, I can make a bunch of Docker containers, which is going to make that easier. But what in this repository makes this an AZD aware thing?
Yes, that kind of comes down to the azure.yaml, which has kind of all of the metadata about our application. So we have like the template, we've got our Azure host, the language, and a bunch of stuff that kind of makes this a true template. And actually, this is kind of the entry point if you were to use the VS Code extension for the CLI as well. We have all of the commands kind of stitched on to the azure.yaml.
Okay, so the azure.yaml is what made this, what made AZD know that it's a thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Does that mean I would make an azure.yaml for my own application if I wanted to go AZD up on my app?
Yeah, you'd need a couple other things to kind of get started, right? You'd also need this infrastructure directory, and we can talk about that either here or in VS Code, whatever is easiest. But basically, like the notion here is that we're trying to help you get started on Azure, and I think a lot of people really struggle with figuring out what exactly it is that they need on Azure, right? Like, do I need something for like a database or like something to store my secrets? What's that called on Azure, especially if you're coming from a different cloud or you've never dealt with cloud things. And so the idea here is that we're leveraging infrastructure as code assets to programmatically provision things and deploy them on Azure for you. And this is kind of like a bigger construct to kind of learn about, right? Like if you're not familiar with infrastructure as code, this might be another hurdle on your coding journey. But the kind of beauty of this is that with these templates, you don't really have to worry about the infrastructure pieces until you have to worry about them, like until your application grows in complexity or in fidelity. And so like you can totally piggyback off of what we have here for you and then kind of modify it as you need in the future. But these are all written in Bicep, which is a domain-specific language that's used for provisioning resources on Azure. And so we're really just defining out what you need instead of, saying, oh, go to the portal and click around and figure out what you want, right? So in here, we see that we've got, Cosmos database stuff, we got Key Vault stuff.
Could I just ask briefly that you hit Control+ and just make it a little bigger for my old eyes? There we go. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, Cosmos for database, Key Vault for secret storage, App Insights for application monitoring dashboard. We've got a front-end API, front-end URL, back-end URL, so we can click through those later once everything's deployed.
And is Bicep its own language, or is it JSON, or is it both?
It's like its own thing. It's a Azure specific language used for provisioning resources.
Okay.
But we're actually going to have Terraform support in the future as well in the coming month or so. So people will be able to choose between kind of Bicep or Terraform for kind of writing out infrastructure as code things. We're trying to make this as, approachable and tailored to the community as possible.
Wow.
But yeah, I guess the one other thing, you kind of mentioned it, but we've got a lot of different stuff in here for, handling that inner loop development workflow. So like that code build or code debug run scenario. So like trying to support you in VS Code with like a launch JSON for debugging and a task JSON for spinning up the front end and back end for local development. We've even got, some tests in here written in Playwright, which is another open source framework that we have here at Microsoft. But yeah, we're just trying to really set you up for success so that you kind of have like, it's not just that we're doing infrastructure as code stuff or provisioning or deploying on Azure, but we really want everyone to feel like they're set up for success, right? And that there isn't such like a dichotomy between your local environment and the cloud.
How come there's a green button that says use this template? How come that doesn't say clone or, the stuff I'm used to seeing?
Yeah, so we've added these as public template tags. So basically, if I click this, it'll ask me to, bring it into my own repository and name
makes it your own.
Yeah, you can make it your own and kind of customize it. And I think that provides kind of an easy way for you to, modify it out and modify it and then share it back out with the community if you want to kind of make amendments or tailor it to your own scenario.
Okay. So we spent a lot of time in GitHub here, though, but this is a CLI. Get me into the CLI and teach me.
Yeah. So I can zoom. Should I zoom in a bit more?
Yeah, do a little control scroll here for me.
Control scroll. Is that better?
There we go. Cool.
All right. So I guess to start off, let's talk about pulling that code down that we just looked at on GitHub. So I'm going to start out by writing. I'm already in a new directory I created for this recording. But let's start out by running azd-init, which will pull the code down from GitHub. And I'm going to be kind of prompted for a couple pieces of information. So first off, I'm asked for a template. I can either select an empty template, which will help with kind of the scaffolding if you were to want to create your own template. I can also choose from one of the sample Azure samples that we looked at, which are kind of the ones that we've authored for now. I can also specify a template that isn't part of this list by running azd-init-t and passing in the full URI. So if I had, one that isn't listed here, I could totally use that as well. But for today, I'm just going to go ahead and select this to do Python Mongo template. And now I'm going to be prompted for 3 more pieces of information. First being a new environment name. And this is kind of, I know environment can be a bit of an overloaded term, but essentially this is just an AZD construct for kind of collecting all of your resources on Azure. You can name this effectively whatever you want.
But it's not a resource group, because that's what a collection of resources is on Azure.
Yeah, so it is the resource group, but it's like specific to AZD. So like there's like things are tagged with this as well. Yeah, so it's kind of its own construct. But we're actually investigating changing this flow in the future to kind of introduce this concept later for new learners until they actually need it. But for right now, you can name this whatever you want. You could even have multiple environments later on if you cared about that. Maybe one for dev, test, prod.
Yeah, I was because when you said environment, I'm like dev, test, staging. I was immediately thinking that.
Yeah, so I'm actually just going to name it like Savannah 0818, which is today's date. You can name it whatever you want though. I'm going to be prompted for a region, and I'm just going to select East US 2, and then I'm going to be prompted for a subscription, and that's basically it. And so now you're like, well, what did that do, right? So if I open this in VS Code, and of course there's an update.
That's cool. I always think this is an opportunity to teach, though, because what you're showing there is that you happen to be on Windows, but you're using WSL.
Yeah.
So you are inside of Linux on Windows, and when you launched code, it splits code in half. So now you
Yeah.
have the Windows Code client and the Visual Studio Linux code server that is going to be handling all of your extensions, which is kind of a cool thing. And that moment where it updated is like, oh, let's remind folks that that's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a strong proponent of WSL. I love it. But yeah, so basically what we're looking at is exactly those same files that we looked at on GitHub. The one addition here is this .azure directory, which is kind of the other piece of like what makes this a usable template for me to provision and deploy. And so you can see in here, I've got a subdirectory with that environment name that I specified. And if I had multiple, I would have multiple subdirectories with different environments. And in here, I've got a .m file, and that has all of this information that we're going to need to actually do our provision and deploy later on. But basically, that's what this contains, and this specifies where things are going to live on Azure. So yeah, so that's pretty much what happened there. We can. I guess one thing to show here too, because I have the VS Code extension installed, is that if you wanted to use this in VS Code, you go to the marketplace, search for the Azure Developer CLI extension, and then once that's loaded, you can run the same commands in VS Code. So we could either run this in the CLI, we could run it in VS Code. We also have support in Visual Studio.
And that appeared because you right-clicked on .env or because you right-clicked anywhere in the repository?
I right-clicked on the Azure.yaml.
Right-clicked on Azure.yaml.
I could also access this from the command palette.
Yeah,
so Azure Developer, we have a bunch of the commands there. So pretty much however you want to use it. I really think it's pretty convenient to just right-click on Azure.yaml, and it gives you kind of the synopsis of what each of these is doing. But yeah, I just wanted to show that off because I think I like to kind of stay in one place. So I probably tend towards using it in VS Code more than I actually use it as a standalone CLI these days. Cool. So let's I guess we already kind of talked about the infrastructure as code resources. So now I guess we can use those and we can provision our resources on Azure and actually also deploy them in a single step. In fact, I could have ran azd up and done the initialization of the repository or the code base on my computer, provisioned and deployed in a single step. Or
so you're saying you would say azd init, azd up, and that's it?
Yeah. So I could have even just done this in a single step with just azd up.
And the init would have been implied.
Correct. But now, because I've already run init to pull the code down, because I wanted to show everyone before we just went to Azure, the init will kind of no-op, and we'll just do the provision and deploy. So once I run that, I'm not going to be reprompted for this information because it already knows about the template and the environment and the subscription and all that. But it's going to start the provision and deploy in a second here. And we'll have kind of access to progress. And as this kind of progresses, it'll print out all of the different resources that are created along with their kind of unique identifiers. Do you have a question, Scott?
And you're in Windows Terminal, so you can click on that link right there and go immediately and watch that if you felt like it.
That's correct. So if I click this, it will bring me to the dashboard. Oh, we're not quite yet because it's kind of, I think we were a little.
Oh, it's probably still like deploying. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to mess that up, but yeah, but in a sec, there it is.
Yeah.
And then you'll get your deployment stuff.
Yeah. If I go back here and it's going to make me log in again.
Gotta log in.
Not yet. I don't know why it's doing that.
It's chewing.
Yeah.
I get the idea. Okay. But you're getting feedback right here at the command line anyway.
Yeah. So this is kind of the progress. And then, I'm gonna do a bit of like a 1-2 swap because this does still take a bit of time because we are kind of setting up, everything you're gonna need. It's not just application hosting. It's like setting up an account with the right permissions and roles and a key vault for secret storage and Cosmos DB and.
Well, and actually, if I may, this brings up a really interesting point because you made the comment at the beginning about this is also best practices. Like at the simplest, you could just spin up a container. Hey, look, I put a thing in the cloud. Yep. But you're doing this correctly. You've got a key vault. You want to make sure that your connection strings aren't just floating around in code. You're trying to do this right. You're setting up app service and log analytics because you want to make sure that you're doing best practices. So you're doing it for developers, but you're also not trying to just be sloppy and just spin up a single container. You're doing it correctly. And I think that's a really important point to call out.
Yeah. I mean, you could totally hard code all your secrets in line, but like maybe don't do that, right? That's super secure. So yeah, we're really trying to set everyone up for kind of success as they actually get on Azure. And yeah, so I guess kind of swapping over to a completed version, I literally ran the same.
Right. This is just like Julia Childs puts the cake in now, and that cake has already been cooked.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to basically be able to show that, we had everything provisioned. It prints out exactly, what was provisioned for you along with the unique identifier. And if I go and I click into the portal here, I'll be able to see these same unique identifiers in my resource group, which kind of creates that connection between the CLI and the portal. And so there is consistency there.
Right. Go ahead and hit Control+ just a smidge for me, please.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Thank you so much. Okay, so then this is the resource group and all the things you made. You made 8 different things, like we said before, Key Vault and 2 app services and App Insights, and everything's all plugged together into one cohesive resource group.
Yeah, exactly. So everything's, and kind of the beauty of this is that because we ran AZD up, everything's already kind of wired together for us. So
it even made a dashboard? Hang on.
Yes, I will show you that. So yeah, let's just take a look at that dashboard right now. So I'm just going to click through, and yeah, this was all for you. AZD created this, and so you have kind of the usage, reliability, performance, all that good stuff set up for you.
Yeah, look at that. You got to show a response time. Like this is the one that is being fed by all the data and telemetry that comes from Application Insights, and it's a shared dashboard, which means I could share it with my coworkers, so you could share it to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just show you the deployed back end and front end now. So let's pop over to there. So we actually also have an OpenAPI.yaml included in the templates. So you have all that good like API schema, learn about all the endpoints that have been created in this app, so you can kind of click through and understand what you can use and how to use them. And then we also have a front end that's completely wired up. So I've been
go ahead and Control+ a couple more times too for our friends on the phone. There we go.
Cool. And so yeah, the front end completely wired up to Cosmos. Oh, I need to click the plus, not the completed.
Or enter.
Yeah, or enter, one of the two, right? Add a couple things here. I can add a due date. It's all functional, and I can refresh, and all that information will be persisted. And you could share this out with your friends and show them your cool web app that you deployed to Azure. Yeah, and so that's kind of the deployment. So AZD did that in like a single step, basically, which I think is pretty neat.
So that is the whole backend, the portal, the Key Vault for our secrets, the database, because that to-do was putting that in the Cosmos DB database. And that information you said came from that bicep file that expressed everything that needed to be created.
Exactly. Yep.
So then if I want to do this for my own site, I would look at one of the templates, make a bicep file that would do that. So then I could make, like, Azure Friday's website a template that people could learn from. Or I could make it for me as a developer, because right now we have the Azure Friday website. Producer Rob and I have this website, but we don't have dev, test, and staging. I could make it easier to create instances of Azure Friday and go staging or whatever, and do that all with AZD.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to do that. That's going to be cool.
I would love if you did that. And also, like, the process, I would love any feedback that you or anyone else has on kind of the process of making your own template. We're really trying to make that as simple as possible. So yeah, I would totally recommend. We also have guidance and docs on that we could probably share with the folks that are watching too.
So AZD up to deploy and check it out. AZD monitor to look at dashboards and monitoring for application health. And then the AZD pipeline to configure like GitHub Actions to go and do that deployment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so where do I download AZD right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me pull up. So we had this preview release blog post that went out at the beginning of July when we public previewed. We have some guidance for Windows and Mac and Linux. And once you have those installed, you can also follow this guidance for installing on VS Code to use the CLI from within VS Code, or also enable the preview feature in Visual Studio.
I dig it. All right, I'm going to check this out immediately, and I'll integrate it with Visual Studio as well. This has got the The little gray cell is starting to think about how I'm going to make this happen in my own life. Thanks so much for sharing this with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
All right, I am learning all about the Azure Developer CLI, a faster way to get to the cloud, today on Azure Friday. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Azure Friday. Now I need you to like it, comment on it, tell your friends, retweet it. Watch more Azure Friday.